Good afternoon. Okay, so we have 2 more lessons till the end of the semester, and the plan. Okay, and the plan is for this lesson. In the first part, like before the break, discuss some related concepts related to predictive coding that we haven't had time to discuss in the last 2 lessons, as they kind of got a little bit spread. They're not the same, but they are related, and they're part of the kind of general scheme that we will discuss. I will discuss. Then we'll have a break, and then immediately after the break, you will present. And at the second part of the second lesson, we'll discuss some issues that are related to adults, and specifically, I want to discuss the paper by Tenenbaum and Griffith, about which you were asked questions. Did all of you answer questions about, suppose you meet a person who's 27 years old, I don't know what the numbers were, what's his life expectancy to the best of your judgment, or something like this, right? Right? Does it? Okay. So I hope we'll have time to discuss the paper, the results, alternative accounts compared with their own original account. So I will discuss it to the extent that we'll have time left at the end of the second lesson, which has to do with the question of Bayesian inference and how rich is our representation of the distribution of stimuli in the world, like total amount of years that people live. Do we just keep the average? Do we keep sort of a rich representation, etc.? And I hope we'll get time to discuss that. And in the last lesson, the main question we ask is to what extent all these sort of broader, to some extent, computational conceptualizations help us understand better cases and difficulties of special populations. Do they allow a real window of insight compared with previous accounts? Basically, very, very crudely, at least my own account of general sort of traditional, classical cognitive explanations is that they do not apply well to populations for whom they were not designed. This is a general characteristics of probably most models. So we'll ask that too in the last lesson. Okay. The reason I wanted to add the first part, so let's just to the more formal baseline. Everybody is familiar with sort of Marr's conceptualizations of 3 levels of representation because they were presented at some point. Wonderful. So Marr's lifespan was not very long. It was much shorter than the average of the population, but he's had a lot done in the time that he did live. And there are several aspects. One is his kind of analysis of different levels of addressing, let's say, or independent levels of addressing brain issues. And one of his main claims here is that these levels can be studied independently, right? Because they do not constrain each other. Sort of the implementation, the brain implementation and the neural implementation of, let's say, neurons. The brain is made of neurons, the neural network is a specific implementation that does not in itself constrain the algorithms that we are using. So we can address each of these levels separately, and we can address the computational level, which is kind of mostly what the Bayesian account does, right? It addresses mainly the computational level. We can address the algorithmic level, which is done a lot in psychophysics, and this, which is the implementation, sort of physiology, whatever, in a very broad sense, addresses the neuronal level. This was a conceptualization underlying Marr's work in vision. And what he was mainly trying to do is kind of, and this is in a way addressing your question about predictive coding, what he was mainly trying to show is that an essentially bottom-up account for visual processing can take you a long way to almost the level of identification, right? If I want to identify you, I have to have some high-level account, some in a way, library of potential faces to which I have to compare the current stimulus. But the idea is that it goes a long way and it generalizes, and then some sort of generalized perspective is compared to what I see. So in a way, when you were saying, yes, there's a lot of evidence that shows that we use specific predictions, that predictions are important, but not necessarily in the specific way that predictive coding is suggesting in a very, very strong manner. So what is the main claim? So the main claim is kind of against the Mars, very, very, whatever, traditional view. I don't know if anybody, well, I don't know why it keeps jumping, takes this very, very strong versions that this is the case, because everybody agrees that prediction and what we anticipate and some aspects of attention and what is attention within this framework is not well defined. Everybody agrees that it's important, but what does it mean? Okay, and this is kind of, to an extent, what we'll try to elaborate on in this lesson. We talked about predictive coding, and I want to address some other perspectives. All agree that our predictions are important, but in what way do they play a role? Okay, so within this very, very broad conceptualization, I want to make some comments, some other accounts, to present some other accounts. So first, sensory motor, right? Because we discussed predictive coding in the context of perception. But actually, where it really, really falls in a very natural way is when we talk about sensory motor interaction. Why does it fall so naturally when we think about sensory motor loops in a way? Think about it. Just think about how we look at the world. Look in terms of eye movements, right? So now as I say it, you follow me there, okay, and the eyes move, right? The eyes move, and you follow me, but your perception of the world is stable. What does it mean? How does it come about, right? Because when you move the eyes, if you think about what happens in the retina, it's pretty terrible, right? Because you move like this, and everything moves, let's say, for instance, on the other direction on the retina, right? But this is not what you experience, which means you have some form of comparison between what? Between, in a way, the movement on the retina that you predict would happen as a function of your motor command and the actual movement on the retina, right? You have to do that. And if they cancel each other, so there is a comparator that cancels these, what would you like to experience? Stable world, which is what you experience even when you move your eyes, and your eyes keep moving all the time. They kind of have this jitter. Suppose you don't move your eyes, and you still perceive a movement on your retina. Then you interpret the world as moving, right? So you have to have a prediction to dissociate movements on the retina that stem from your motor commands and movements on the retina that do not, and attributed hence, typically in a correct manner, but we can introduce bizarre, abnormal conditions where this would not be the case. You'd have some percept of the world which is moving, and this is correct, right? So you have to have some kind of assessment of prediction error, right? Which is the error between the movement you expect based on what? Your motor command, based on what you sent. Well, whether it's a motor command exactly or not, I don't want to get into it, but let's say motor command, and the actual experience, right? And if you embed it in a more specific way, so let's go, once we have this concept, well, it's kind of a very, very general concept. Of course, this is true all the time in the way we look at the world, but also there is an example like, okay, I see this bell. Well, let's take actually to the eye movement case. I'm looking at you, you're at the focus of my retina, but now I want to focus, to fixate, right? To fixate on you, okay? I'm here. I want to fixate on you. There's some very, very blurred visual information from you right? Because it's blurred, because when I fixate on you, you do not fall on the center of my retina, right? But you're not beyond my field of view, so I have some basic visual information, and let's say now I want to fixate on you. What would be the process leading me to this, right? Leading me to this move of change of fixation. So let's follow it with this in mind, okay? So let's see how people see it within, in a way, the framework, sensory motor, within the framework of, let's say, predictive coding. So in this case, the desired state is to fixate on you, right? And now let's start. We have to. I mean, it's a loop. We have to start somewhere. So what is the comparator? Look, what I want you to take it through is these two comparators, right? So let's start with the, in a way, higher one. Desired state is to shift my gaze, to shift my fixation from you to you. So this is one input, and this is the desired, and this is where current state estimate, we'll get into it, but let's just take it as a source of input. So this is my estimate, is that I'm looking at you, and my desire is to look at you. There is a comparison, and the comparison, in a way, is the distance that I have to make between my current condition and where I want to go. This is an information in what domain? Visual, sensory. Now I have to translate this sensory gap in terms of the distance between where I am and where I want to be into motor command. Okay? So we're not going to get into how I do it, but this is kind of this difference, which is a sensory difference. This is the comparison between where I want to be and where I estimate that I am, is fed into what is called inverse model. Why is it called inverse? Because it has, like the distance, a sensory input, and the output is motor command, okay? So it's sensory to motor. This is the distance I want to make in sensory visual coordinates, and the whole issue of motor command and how we're going to change, what are the sensory coordinates we are using, is beyond the scope of what I want to, the essence that I want to discuss. So we have some sensory distance, we feed it into the inverse model, which means that this is a model that gets the sensory distance and outputs a series of motor commands, okay? So this is what the inverse model does. This is that. So it produces motor commands. Now the motor commands have, in a way, it's the same thing. It's the same motor commands. First, it goes into actual motor command, okay? It is sent to the muscles and leads to a series of motor sequence, whatever, eye movement, okay? Whether it's a series, let's say, just to a voluntary movement. But this is another direction, and this is called here forward model. In a way, it's the same. Why is it a forward model? Because it has a motor command, and at its output, it is estimating sensory, right? So it's from motor to sensory. My estimate is like, I'm looking at you, I have a motor command, and its output is, will I be fixating at you, okay? So this is the forward model. In traditional literature, it's called, no, this is the actual command to the muscles, and this is a copy, well, it's kind of hinting a copy of the command to the muscle, and it's called copy. Is one word. Efferent's copy is the word. Is this term familiar to you? This is a very important term, and it's kind of a term that is very traditional. I mean, this is a classic term, which was very obvious to people starting more than 100 years ago to look at how we managed to do, like, to keep a stable world, because we have the command to the muscle, but we have to have some comparison between what is the command to a muscle and the information of what actually happened, let's say, in our retina, right? So we compare what can be accounted for by our own muscles. Why? Because we have this information about the motor command, and here, of course, there's an implicit assumption that what you ask the muscles to do is what they actually do, okay? And so this is the forward model, in this case, traditionally called efferent's copy, since it's just to make sure that you can also spell the word by now. יש לי טושים איפשהו. So efference copy. Efference copy is from the center distally, right? So it's copy as opposed to afference. Efference as opposed to afference. All these things are kind of blurry or familiar, nothing? Okay, so anyhow, so this is the copy. The idea is that you send the motor command for the muscle to move, but you also send a copy for a comparison between your motor plan or what can be accounted for by your motor plan and the actual movement on your whatever. Here, it's a very general concept. It's not specific to eye movement. For instance, it will also apply to, we keep blinking, right? We keep blinking all the time, but our perceptual world doesn't get dark, right? And if we had the same amount of darkening, but we were not to blink, it was just when our eyes are open, we'd have the same amount of darkening. It's not completely dark because they're not completely opaque, our eyelids, right? But still, we don't experience any of that. Again, how do we do that, okay? So we send the interpretation is that, and there's several studies that support this interpretation, that we send some motor command or for command to do the blinking, and if the darkening of the world can be accounted for by the motor commands of the blinking, then we don't experience such a blink, right?
It's also used to explain why we perceive, like when we move our eyes, we perceive the movement as a sequence and not as just fixations that are discrete.
What do you mean?
Because when we move our eyes, we have like different discrete fixations. We don't see, it's not like a sequence. It's not a...
No, but we have different types of eye movements. We have what's called saccade, which is kind of from one fixation to the other. And we have a saccade planning, which is kind of the motor command, and it takes about 200 milliseconds to do the planning. The movement itself is extremely fast. The fastest motor movements that we have is these saccades. Then we fixate, but we also have smooth pursuit, which is a different kind of movement. It's like when I follow, I follow like this, and this is kind of a smooth pursuit, and it's not.
Don't perceive input during the saccade, only during the fixation. We don't feel it. We don't feel like we closed our eyes or we didn't, or we were blind for a few milliseconds. So it might also apply to this more.
So this is an interesting question, and I will only say a sentence about it, which is important. Like, what happens? Like during the saccade, we have things moving on our retina, but we don't perceive them, right? So how do we do that? And there's some kind of saccadic suppression, which is kind of we suppress the expected movement on our eye. And what are the mechanisms underlying the suppression? They're partly understood, but I don't want to dwell onto them. So, right? There's a term for it. There's many years it was obvious that we have some kind of mechanism that compensates, but it's not that we are blind during this period. I don't want to get in, it's a complicated thing, I don't want to get into detail. We're not blind, we get some input and we use it, but it's a complex process of what are the things that we suppress as we move and what are the things that we don't. We don't suppress all information. Anyhow, so this is the efference copy. We're talking about, okay, so the motor command, there's a forward model, which is also the efference copy. And now I want to go through what goes here, okay? What goes into this? So the concept of efference copy is a very long traditional concept, but seeing it as a forward model, in a way, is a kind of combining prediction error with this question for me?
Yeah, just wondering, you were talking about the motor areas and the copy sensory area, so you would know that I'm blinking right now or scanning, so it would know.
Right, so you're asking whether comparator is located in the brain in a way?
Models that I learned about actually think that this computation is done without input from the motor areas, or at least about scanning. The computation regarding the fact that there is a scan now, and we should subtract that, whatever, is not done by feedback from the motor areas, but it could have been performed on artificial.
Right. So the concept of efference copy here, the forward model, is that it comes before any feedback of what actually moved. It is a copy of the command to the muscles. And and usually there is a consistency between the command to the muscles and what happens, and we also learn to calibrate that. But we can, for instance, if you look in, well, let's do it for a second. If you look at something, at a page, okay, or page or a computer, it doesn't matter, and we just move your eye like this, right? Your eyeball, okay? You move your eyeball. Close the other one, because I don't want, or you can, I don't know, close one, just move the eyeball, and look at whether you see, no, move the eyeball, you're not closing. Okay, I mean, if you move your closed eyeball, it's not very informative, okay? So, what? Which? No, that's the point. The point is that we can bypass the motor command, the efference copy, which is then, it's not an efference copy that gets information from all the muscles that we have, or muscles in the hand. It's a motor command of the muscles to the eye muscles that move it. So for instance, if we move like this, okay, I wanted you to, because it's complex, because we can't move, just to let this source of input out, because it's a kind of source of noise. So if you look at it, and if you try to read, okay, you can see that the page is moving, right? All I'm saying is that if you move, okay, the whole idea is look at something, you see that look at something. If you're willing to say you see movement, I will not press more, right? You see movement? You see things are moving?
The whole scene shifts.
Fine, yeah, okay. Why? And it has to do with your question.
Yeah, but it doesn't necessarily extend a lot to the everything looks like an actual scan. We don't know.
So right. So it's a very good comment. So maybe the reason we don't compare, we don't have, in a minute we'll get into a bit more detail about this comparator, but maybe the reason we still experience movement is not because we bypass the actual muscles, but there is a comparison that compensates for a specific range of movement, and now we're not within this range, right? Because we didn't control for that. This is a possibility. Yeah, because we can, right? So this is a valid comment. Yes, I can tell you that you can do it within the same range of the saccades. I do not, actually, it's about the same range of the saccades now that I think about it, because you can, you can move, well, I'm not sure if we can calibrate the rate of movement of the saccades. But we can do okay. I have a control for you, because, so you understand the question, right? Because maybe we moved it and there's no control because we're not good in controlling the velocity that we moved our eye, right? Rather than we don't have information for these muscles, right? This is a potential account for what I said. But basically, you could do a pursuit which is in the same rate that you move. So you could do a pursuit which is like this, and then the world will not move, right? You do like this, okay? Now, move your eye intentionally through your muscles at the same rate. Not to saccade, at the same rate, which is, okay? I cannot control it exactly the same rate, but roughly the same rate, and you will not experience the page moving, okay?
You can also move the page at the same velocity of the page.
Something like this. Something like this, okay? Yes.
On the other hand, if you close one eye and then, like if you close one eye and then the other, and those are your eye muscles, you do perceive it as.
Yeah, I think we can probably introduce abnormal situation in which you'll bypass some of these mechanisms and you'll experience movement. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. So here is it. So this is the efference copy, which is a copy of the movement to the muscles. And here is the actual voluntary, this is actually the movement to the muscles, right? The signal to the muscles. So the muscles move, and there is some sensory feedback. Because I move, okay? Finally, after all the discussion, I move my saccades, and now I look at you. Because there was a command. There's also an efference copy saying, yeah, this is the kind of movement I asked. I move, and I look at you. And now I have sensory feedback, because I look at you. And this sensory feedback says, yes, I see you, okay? Or maybe I didn't do it well, and I have a sensory feedback, well, actually, I see a D instead of you, and this is a distance from my desire. So this is kind of sensory feedback, but now there's another source of information which I find interesting. This is kind of a novel addition in the conceptualization of motor control, because there is one thing which is interesting. So the forward model, the efference copy, is also used to form some series of prediction of where do I predict I'm going to be based on this motor command, okay? And now I have this comparator, this comparison between my prediction, the prediction of my forward model, and let's say my forward model says I'm here, and this is how it was designed, and then I have sensory information. If I'm here, I'm happy, okay? There's no difference between what I wanted and okay, I have an estimate that I'm in the right place, but if there's a dissociation, I still have a prediction error, and then I have to do something. Some models say, okay, you can have some loops here because the sensory loops are faster than the sensory motor loops, because our sensory loops are fast in terms of, okay, we need to go through some synapses, whereas our muscles are pretty slow. So maybe we have some rounds here which allow us some correction before we actually have a motor movement, but that's beyond of what we want to say today. An interesting aspect, which is the aspect in I don't know, it's blue or purple, it's blue here. An interesting aspect is, what does this comparator, what is the sense that this comparator gives us, okay? A comparison between what we predict will be our sensory situation and what our actual sensory situation is, okay? This is a sensory prediction error. And what is the difference, what does the difference tell us? So first, right, whether to what extent, in a way, I'm the person, me as an agent, is in charge of the changes in the perception or the perceptual, the sensory information that I receive, right? If the difference is zero, let's have an ideal situation. The difference is zero. If the difference is zero, then I have a very strong and happy, in a way, sense of agency, you know, because sense of agency, to what extent the changes of stimuli that I receive are a consequence of my activity in the environment, right? If it's all a consequence of myself, okay, my sense of agency is very happified, which is linked with what would be the zero difference in this comparator, right? The changes I have are fully accounted by the prediction of the changes that I should have based on my motor commands, okay? So this is kind of a strong sense of, happified agency. And one of interesting interpretation to some aspects of whatever psychiatric difficulties is a violated, in a way, sense of agency. We often have a dissociation between our predictions and what we actually have, okay? Some dissociations, as I said, are expected, because if the world is moving, etc., if there's a big dissociation, then they're expected, even though there's a different pattern of world moving and just noisy representation, but in a way. But basically, yeah. So this kind of is an interesting comparison because it gives us a sense of, I don't know if it's conscious or subconscious or self of agency, to what extent the world, we're on top of what's going on, okay? Yeah. Of course, it's not on a one-to-one because the world is moving, etc. But basically, if consistency, we have discrepancy here, we are in trouble, and we cannot correct for them, and whatever we try to change, we still have a dissociation, we are in trouble. So this was just, introducing sensory motor part. Other aspects, the second aspect I wanted to have, 15 minutes should suffice, is within, are you familiar with this very, very important conceptualization? You're smiling because? Okay, good. So, why do I introduce it in this context? Because it's very related to the concept of hierarchical prediction error. It emphasizes, it is a conceptualization of perception, emphasizes the role of prediction, but in a way attributes the hierarchy somewhat different function than prediction error, and I wanted to introduce this in this context and to some extent compare these views and whether they yield different predictions. You might guess that I have support for one over the other, but you're very welcome to suggest the alternatives. So this is a conceptualization of perceptual learning and perception in general that originally, several years ago, Charles Ochsen and myself proposed, and then I collaborated with Ellie and students to introduce it not only to the visual modality but also to the auditory modality. So before just presenting it with a few sentences, I want to describe the very basic experiment that led us to this idea, just to give you a notion of where it came from. And actually we started with perceptual learning. So perceptual learning of something very simple. And the simple stuff we wanted is there an odd element in this array? Well, of course it's very easy, but you can make it as difficult as you want by having a very, very brief presentation. So if you have a very brief presentation and shortly afterwards you have some mask, you can determine how difficult it is by the time interval you have between the first presentation and the second. Okay, so there's odd element in the orientation dimension. There's an odd element in color, and these are considered like feature. Again, I'm not familiar to what extent you know, like feature integration theory of Arndt Klinsmann, is that something you're familiar with? Depending on whether you study psychology?
We talked about a bunch of this stuff
We
with Charles.
shall. Okay, so Charles taught all of you a lesson on physiology? Yeah? Okay. But I was asking not about the number of lessons, but the number of participants. Everybody heard something about this from Charles? Those that show these kind of pictures by Charles, who are they? And those that didn't, because? But you didn't? But Charles taught you physiology in those who haven't been exposed to it is because you didn't study physiology yet? No, okay, this is physiology B and you studied only physiology A, right? No. Okay. So 5 minutes will be familiar to 2/3 of you, and then the rest probably not. Okay. I mean the rest of the lesson, which is 5 more, probably not. Okay. So, but then, those of you familiar with it could help me and could actively participate in it. So the idea traditional idea was this is performed quickly because kind of effortlessly, like detecting an odd element, a color, orientation, odd element. Why is it so easy? Right, this is a description, not a mechanism. Why is it so easy? Why does it pop out? Right, but I could have a cup in a series of, I don't know, whatever, some other items, and it will not pop up. What characterizes the things that pop up immediately?
The single feature of the disk.
What? Okay, but what are the things that are detected in parallel? What kind of oddballs are detected in parallel so they pop out even when you have an array of many, many items, right? So if it were in series, it would have taken a long time because you have to go one by the other. But if it's in parallel, it still pops out, but not everything pops out. What are the things that pop out according to let's say, traditional bottom-up based views? The things that are processed early within the bottom-up hierarchy, right? And what are the things that are processed early within the bottom-up hierarchy? Let's say basic features. The features are not agreed by everybody because it's not obvious how to determine a basic feature. But let's say for orientation, there's a very good case because V1 is already sensitive to, right, different orientations are represented differently. So there's a case for why, it pops out because it is detected early, right? Which has already a question that I will just put in the background. So is our perception determined, what do we perceive quickly? Whatever is perceived early within the hierarchy. You might have some notion of predictive coding. It does not say anything direct about it in any specific way. How is it all directly related to the percept, to our experience, to what we see? Do we see what is here? Do we see what's there, what's there? In a way, in predictive coding, after a while, it's all consistent, right? Because you update all levels to be consistent within the same hypothesis. But what do you perceive first? Whatever is represented at high level, at low level. Implicitly, this assumes that you have quick access to things that are sorted out early within this hierarchy, right? That's why it pops out, because it's an early process. And the interpretation to this not popping out, right? There is an odd element here, which is this one, right? And so it's what makes it special is the conjunction of two basic features, right? It's the only green one that has this orientation, but it's not special in color, which is a feature, or orientation, which is yet another feature, just in the conjunction. And conjunction doesn't pop out. Why doesn't it pop out? Right, because at the lower levels, we don't have features for this conjunction, right? We don't have feature detectors for this conjunction. So the only way we actually identify it is when we serially walk through whatever. It doesn't have to be item by item, but to small groups of items and do this identification. So this is something that goes slowly, serially, and not in parallel, because this is something we actively decide upon. And it's kind of, what is it in this position, this position, this? There's no parallel processing for these complex conjunctions, right? So, now the question is, but we can improve when we train. How do we improve it? We do it many, many times in a challenging situation. We have very brief presentation, let's say, of orientation pop-out. Now the question is, suppose we improve. So how do we do it? We improve. Suppose we improve. Well, we do improve. How do we know that we improve? We just measure. So all of you, if you were exposed to this for very brief presentations, so the duration of the presentation on the x-axis, the percent correct on the y-axis, and this is how you start. So when it's longer, you do better. This is percent correct. When it's longer, you do better. This is average performance. And this is after several hundred tries, and this is after several thousand tries, right? So for a given duration, let's say 50 milliseconds, initially you're at chance level. So you ask whether there's an odd element, 50% is chance level, okay, initially you're at chance level, and then you improve to be at 80% correct. So now the question is, can we say anything of where improvement took place? So people improved.
Perhaps you can do some strengths.
Probably on all levels, of course. According to predicted code.
Okay. But now I'm asking, how can we try to decipher where learning took place? Or maybe more than one level.
How?
Can we?
Yeah, but was it done like in certain days, or how was it? Just repeat the repetition one after the other?
How did we do that, you mean?
Yeah. What was the schedule?
Oh, okay, so let's say this is an average of the first day. So you have a small block of 50 milliseconds, a small block of 66 milliseconds, a small block of that, a small block of that, and then you have several blocks at a day, and then you have another day, another day, another day, and this is, let's say, what happens after 10 days.
So it's improvement, each color is within one day, and then for different days?
Let's say so, yeah. It's like within the first day there's faster improvement, so you can see that, but this is kind of average. This is from the first day, and this is, let's say, after 10 days. Does it help? Okay. So one way of looking, one in a way behavioral reasoning about where changes took place is to see the specificity of the changes. For instance, the specificity to orientation. Why? Why would it be informative? Or at least according to at least a naive way, because what happens along the hierarchy? There is convergence. Let's say at the higher level where we are sensitive to faces and we're sensitive to faces or to houses, whether they're like this, whatever. There's a convergence in the sense that receptive field sizes are larger and they're broader in terms of sensitivity to orientation. So if learning happens at V1, what do we expect if we now train always in the same orientation but now switch the orientation? It will not transfer. On the other hand, if learning occurs at whatever, IT, object-related areas, higher level category-related areas, and now we switch the orientations, what do we expect to happen? So we expect to see generalization, that you learn something which is more abstract and we see generalization. So now this is what we asked, either specificity to position to orientation. I'll show you just one experiment, and this will be the interesting part, is that how specific learning is depends on several parameters. You can get different patterns of specificity within the same task, actually within the same participants. So the same participant, I will not show you that just for simplicity, because you get the different durations show, different intervals, show different levels of generalization, but let's say different groups. So just for simplicity, this is the learning curve, so this is the threshold, how long exposure you needed to attain 80% correct of this group. This is an average, and then at this point, after 10 days of training, all orientations were swapped. What we see here is the threshold increased again, namely, learning was specific to orientation. Within this interpretation, it means to us that learning occurred low level. Okay? Now, if you do exactly the same paradigm, but why does it keep jumping? Sorry. If we do exactly the same paradigm, but it's not that the odd element could be at any position within the array. The odd element could be only in one of two positions which are near the fixation. It's kind of easier within the same thing, but at any given trial, it has the same characteristic. It's just that the range of difficulty is smaller, okay, because the odd element is near. And there's not a lot of uncertainty, because when it's there, it would only be in two positions. What we see is that learning is faster, and when we switch, we did the same kind of swapping with switch orientation. Generalize this, okay? So it's the same task. I'll just finish in this four experiments, and it's the same task, but here we see fast learning and generalization, okay? And the same pattern is shown if we do the same two positions, but instead of 30 degrees difference, it's a smaller orientation difference, we still see learning. It's somewhat slower, but then we see specificity. Okay, it's the same task. We see specificity. This is each a different group, and here is just the last fourth group. Again, the same, everything basically the same, but the oddball is 90 degrees difference. Okay, it's a larger orientation difference. So it's 90 degrees difference. It's faster learning. Still, you have to learn. It's faster learning. There's complete transfer cross orientation. Okay, so it's not that the simple task is either low level or high level according to our mapping between specificity and where it occurs. Actually, easy conditions transfer, consistently easy conditions generalize, and difficult conditions show specificity. Okay? So in our interpretation, we mapped that easy conditions generalize, namely easy conditions are learned high level, in the sense just that we reasoned earlier. Okay, it's following just the same reasoning. Okay, easy conditions occur higher level because they generalize, and difficult conditions occur at lower level and they show specificity. And the second question we asked, do we see any dynamics in terms of easy versus difficult? You can guess, right? But it shows, the way we see it is very interesting because this is the last slide I'm going to show, and it is just as you asked, what is the protocol? Okay, so we have 20 trials difficult, 20 trials easy, but they're all mixed. So now we can pool, even though they are mixed on a grand scale, in a way in hundreds of trial scales, we can pool the dynamics by calculating for each block how the improvement went on. What we see, which is interesting, is that they don't all improve in parallel, but to different extents. There is a cascade of improvement. First, we find improvement. Okay, this is percent correct as a function of how many trials you practice. So first we see improvement in the easy one, longer duration, then in the shorter ones, then in the shorter ones, and the most difficult one also improved, but it didn't look like this. It first didn't improve, and only after this one showed a substantial improvement, it kind of kicked in terms of improving. Okay? So the way in our interpretation we put all these things together was that you start improving with the easy, high level. This is where you access. Basically, this is the level that as a default underlies our perception. This is kind of, okay. And then, if it gets harder, you get to more informative representations, lower level. More informative in this case is lower level, because it's about orientation sensitivity, so more information is represented at lower levels. And more difficult, so there is a cascade which happens only if you're asked to perform more difficult situations. So it's not that automatically you'll go downwards. You're going downwards as a matter of search when more resolution is required. And the way you do it is like you seek backwards for more informative representations. More informative now gets a specific characterizations because it is more informative with respect to the task that you're actually performing. So it's task-specific backward search aimed to fill in where information is missing. So what we are, in this conceptualization, what we are looking for is not compatibility, but is improved resolution. So there's a level that we can operate on, which is the fast level. Gist of representation can be attained at high level, and it is fine, even if it's not consistent completely with what's happening at a lower level. There's no in this view, there's no automatics, going back to see that everything is completely compatible. Each level is characterized with its own level of, in a way, abstraction. Okay? And if you're not asked to do better, it's fine. For instance, when I'm talking to you, when you're listening to me, if I were kind of, this is also true in the auditory modality, words. If I have some missing syllables or something which is not consistent, it's okay. You're not seeking for compatibility. You're seeking for comprehensibility, right? So as long as it's kind of within text, within context, you don't need to fill in the missing gaps because, in a way, it's happy. You're happy. You're satisfied with whatever it is. You don't need to have your prediction go all the way down and everything is consistent. Why? We don't need that. And we only do that when something is inconsistent, we need some more information, etc., etc., etc. So the idea is that to get the gist of a thing, we don't need to do all these predictions as long as it's roughly compatible with what we expect. It's only when we need better resolution that we actually go backwards and seek information. This search, by the way, is what we think of as attention. One demo before the break. This is a demo prepared by Eva. And this is what's called a phenomenon called RSVP. What is RSVP? It stands for Rapid Serial Visual Presentation. So people can perceive categories roughly in a very, very fast series of presentation. Even if there's no specific prediction, okay? There's no specific category you're looking for, you can still identify them if you're not asked for any detail, okay? If you ask for details, this is a different story. But the gist can be identified extremely quickly. How quick? Let's see. This, if it works right, you saw 10 pictures within 1 second, right? 10 hertz, okay? 100 milliseconds per picture. Let me try again because okay, here's my question. Did you see a car? Was there a car? Okay, bad demo. Really? They said no, you said there was. But it was supposed to be. Okay. It's a good... Well, it depends what you're trying to show. Okay, here's what I want you to see. Now let's see it again. Okay, let's see it. Really? Okay, I didn't look. No, this is a problem. Why? Here's why I wanted... Why? Yes. You see the problem? Okay. What? Right, exactly. So, when would you expect to be extremely quick in identifying a series of pictures? Well, you're expected to be quick, according whether it's predictive coding or it's RHT, when you have a specific prediction. So, do you see a car now? Okay, let's do it this way. Do you see a car now? Yes. What is the color of this car? Red. Wonderful. So, your ability to identify a car in a very rapid series of presentation, when you expect the car, is consistent with both RHT and with predictive coding. Why is it consistent with predictive coding? Because you have a prediction for seeing a car, right? The question is whether you're very quick in identifying a series of objects, even if you don't have a specific prediction to what these objects are, okay? I wanted you to be able to see the red car. I'll tell you what. Oh, I know. Okay. So why was I not happy that you didn't see the red car? Because I expect you to see a red car even quickly, even because this is a very general characteristic, even when you don't have a specific prediction for it. However, there are two accounts for why you didn't see the red car. One, because if you don't have a good prediction for it, you can't do this kind of identification very quickly. This is bad for me as RHT representative. However, there's an alternative account which I can live with, and this is, you saw the car, but you have a problem with your working memory because you had 10 pictures, and if you don't have a prediction, then by the time that I'm asking you, you have 10 things to and we all know that 10 items in the memory. This is difficult, right? It's kind of beyond our capacity. So the problem is not in perception, but in your ability to retain. So I know how to get over it. What? Having fewer is a good idea, but we don't have it in our in our demo. But I want you to raise your hands as things happen, as it happens, right? Because I want to see that.
But then you tell us what you expect, and we have predictions. Yeah.
Right. So for the break, you will have me too. Whether we have an idea of how not to ask what, but still. Have an online assessment whether we were able to identify it or not, right? This is the problem. I want to see that, because online we see these pictures very clearly, right? We have an experience that we see the pictures clearly. But how can I show that? You see my point? You see my problem?
Choose the last one.
You saw what?
Choose the last one.
But if I ask, whatever thing, if I ask you in advance, what was the first one, then you have a...
But
No, but if you ask after the assignment, which can should be remember, they probably remember something.
That is true. That is true.
No, but the first time, some of them were...
Anyhow, we'll take a break and we will think of how to improve the demo without prediction as the first thing after the break. But this will be very, very quick because the first thing after we do that, and it will not be more than a minute, will be your presentation.
הם שינו את הרמה של הקושי בגלל שהם שינו את האקסנטריסיטי מהפוביה.
על מי אתה מדבר עכשיו?
סליחה, שאת שינית את הקושי. הלמידה בעצם התרחשה באקסנטריסיטי מסוים בפוביה.
שינינו כמה דברים. כי שינינו בין כל המקומות לשני מקומות, שינינו אחד את ה-level of uncertainty, כי יש רק שני מקומות, ושתיים את ה-difficulty הממוצע, כי שני המקומות האלה יכולים להיות. אבל בעצם זה היה יכול להיות גם זה המקומות הכי קלים. נשארנו רק עם שני המקומות הכי קלים. הם כן יותר קלים.
מעניין. סתם. עוד שאלה, בהקשר למודל הראשון שהצגתי עם האסטרואנסקופים וזה, יש לי איזשהו משהו, ואני לא יודע איך להסביר אותו בהסבר של המודל. נניח אני מזיז את העיניים, עכשיו עושה סקרות מאוד מהירות, הצדדים, מהר מאוד. אז אני כן חווה את הסצנה.
זזה?
זזה? שיש לי את האסטרואנסקופי, ואני מזיז את העיניים. זה ממש כואב.
הפרשנות הכי טובה שלי, זה היה מאוד מעניין, הפרשנות הכי טובה שלי, הוא לא מדביק את הקצב. כאילו, האסטרואנסקופי זה לא ערובה להצלחה תמיד, יש מקומות של...
כן, אבל הוא יותר מהר מהתנועות עיניים, כי הוא שם לפני הביצוע של השריר.
כן. זאת אומרת, אני אומרת, אוקיי, הוא לא מדביק את הקצב, ואתה אומר, למה הוא לא מדביק את הקצב אם... זו שאלה טובה, מתי אני מעדכן את האסטרואנסקופי שלי. כי האסטרואנסקופי, אני לא חושבת, אני לא יודעת, אבל אני לא חושבת שאתה יכול לתת כאילו באפר לשרירים להגיד, אוקיי, זוז לפה, אחר כך זוז לפה, אחר כך זוז לפה. זאת אומרת שאתה חייב, כן, אני לא חושבת שאתה יכול לעשות בץ' של סדרה של טיק טק, טיק טק, ואני לא חושבת, לא מומחית, אבל אני חושבת שלא, מניח שאני צודקת, זה שאתה לא יכול לתת בץ'. אז יש דיליי, מתי אתה יכול לעדכן את הישראל, כאילו, אני לא יודעת אם אתה יכול, נגיד, פה לשלוח את הפורוד לשם, ובאותו זמן כבר לעשות אסטרואנסקופי שעוד לא עשית, זאת אומרת, אני חושב שהאסטרואנסקופי הוא צמוד לזה שתיתן ספיגה חזרה. כאילו, זאת אומרת, הוא מחשב יותר מהר כשכבר נשלחה פקודה לשרירים. נשלחה פקודה לשרירים לזוז, והם עוד לא זזו, זה כבר אומר את זה, עובד. אבל עכשיו, אם אתה מצמיד את זה לחזרה, אני לא חושבת שהאסטרואנסקופי כאילו, הוא יכול לעשות את זה, אוקיי, הלוך, עכשיו בוא נראה את החזור, כי אם הוא צמוד לפקודה לשרירים, זאת אומרת, הוא לא מקדים את התנועה לשרירים, אבל הוא צמוד לפקודה לשרירים, אז כאילו... איכשהו המערכת פה, כן, איכשהו אתה... שאלה את המערכת של הפרדיקציה שלך באופן שהוא לא... כן. ואני חושבת שאין ראייה... אני עושה את האינטרוספקציה, לא, אם זה רק תנועה אחת שהיא מצד אחד וצד שני,
זה פחות בעיה.
עכשיו, יכול להיות שמשהו כמו שיש בילדאפ של האירו, אתה לא מזכיר את הקן, ואז אתה לא יודע איפה אתה נמצא, כאילו, ואז זה נתקון של איפה אתה נמצא, ואז יש בילדאפ של האירו, כי אתה עושה סדרה, אז זה נהיה... זה ההסבר הכי טוב שאני יכולה להציע.
Should we hook up our computer? Or?
Whatever you prefer. Okay, I'm a bit more comfortable, but not really important. If we do it in the second video, because I have plans for afterwards, but it takes about 1 minute if everything is okay to switch computers. So if you're happier, it's good.
I mean,
Let's do it.
movies are
No
all on
problem.
YouTube,
No
but,
problem. I don't think there should be any problem.
Yeah, you can switch it when we're, well, I guess if there are questions, we might want to go back to the slides. But,
This one? Okay.
we're already
אוקיי.
פשוט אומרת, פשוט תגידו, just name את מה שאתם רואים. מיקי, מה הבעיה? שקצב של השיעור הוא יהיה יותר איטי מאשר הקצב של ההצגה. אבל אני יודעת מה, אני יודעת מה זה. זה עושה, אוקיי. אחרי שאתם מתחילים, תגידו את השלישית, משהו כזה. אי אפשר להספיק להגיד את כולה. אני לא רוצה להגיד מראש את השלישית. תראו, יש את האינטרוספקציה שלו, יש את תמונות מאוד ברור. זה לא...
אולי באמת פיזי קול.
נכון. זה לא רע.
זה יהיה... אפשר לעשות את זה כאיזשהו בבית. אני רושם את הדברים שראיתי. בתוך, אפילו לא פעם, אולי אפילו אופן ריקול או רקוגנישן. שתי דברים שונים. ולהכניס את זה.
נכון.
ואז להציג את זה.
זה מעניין, כי... יש לו כמה דברים, זה עולה, אבל אני לא צריכה מה תשובות. כי למשל, אם הייתי עכשיו מראה של תמונות לאט, ושאלת, תגידו כן, לא, אם התמונות היו, איזה אחוז מהתמונות אנשים היו מזהים? זאת אומרת, נניח הזמן מספיק לפלספת, אבל יכול להיות שלא זמן מספיק to introduce ל-long-term memory, או כל מיני דברים כאלה. אבל בטוח שיש דברים כבר לפחות משלושה הבאה את זה.
יכול להיות שהם דורסים אחד בשם. כאילו, מבחינת ה...
זהו, אני לא חושבת שאפשר to introduce ל-long-term memory, אבל זו שאלה מעניינת. זה inacceptable, אין לי פרדיציה. כאילו, מה אתה צריך בשביל... האם הדרישה to perceive היא פחות מחמירה מאשר to retain it, ל-long-term memory?
Oh, how do I turn on the presentation thing?
You mean, how do you switch so that we see? I think it should be this one. Let's see. Are you connected?
I'm connected with this guy.
Is it the right place in your computer?
Seems like it fits.
Will this?
That should work.
But you don't have any music, right?
No.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have 5 more minutes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have 5 minutes.
Okay.
Did you like the paper? Yeah?
It wasn't mind-blowing. And I'm still trying to decide if I really learned anything that I didn't know before.
From the paper?
From the paper. In other words, not that the experiment wasn't new, it's just that...
Insight to me.
Yeah. In other words, I know that adults can do this kind of thing because I'm an adult and I can do it. And obviously I can do predictions relatively well in a way that might be modeled by some kind of Monte Carlo model or whatever. So infants can do it too. Okay, you have to pick it up at some point. So the fact that kids can do it at a very young age.
Right. The question is probably not what you can. One thing is sort of how. Okay, how early can you do it?
Right.
And what is the minimal? Okay. What does it mean in terms of how you learn about the world if you can do what is seen as sophisticated at a very, very, very early stage of your life, right?
Right.
So the question is, you couldn't have had a specific scenario stored. You probably haven't experienced a specific scenario, which you cannot for certain say about now. So how can one account for children or infants' ability, or for in a way some kind of intuitive physics, right? So this is kind of the strength, right?
Yeah, I mean, just having read other things about these kinds of developmental cognitive abilities in the first cognitive processes course, and there also I wasn't especially intrigued. Because it's interesting in general that humans can perform these computations.
But there is a difference between humans and babies, humans in general and babies, in terms of reducing some potential accounts with babies, right?
Yeah,
eliminating some potential accounts.
but the space is still so large in terms of possibilities for how it works. It's not especially meaningful to me the fact that so maybe we can say that if infants can learn at a young enough age, so it's some degree and not learn. Okay, maybe that's interesting, but at a certain point you still haven't really told me anything that meaningful about the mechanism, about what's actually going on.
What is the mechanism in terms of neural implementation? What is the mechanism? Neural implementation?
Yeah, neural implementation, or even let's say algorithmic implementation.
It's really difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is.
Oh, first there isn't. There's no dispute that there isn't. The question is whether you come up with computational constraints, whether it's meaningful, and whether it's an important step in trying to understand. It's not that there are. I mean, this is as good as it gets, right? This is kind of as good as we know, as good as it currently gets. The question is whether it's the first step in better understanding, in a way, sort of. This is kind of pointing to the computational level. So it addresses the computational level. The set an important stage in the path for understanding. This is the question.
If you have a good model, you can somehow build it and try to.
I'm very unconvinced by the Monte Carlo model because as much as I don't know what's happening, I'm pretty sure that that's not what's happening. I think it's very unlikely that we're computing a very large number of trajectories and predicting an outcome based on those trajectories. That seems to me to be way too cognitively intensive. Like I think the more intuitive approach would be heuristics. I think that's when we talk about rules of physics and things like that, I think that in terms of our understanding of rules of physics, I think it's much more heuristics that we've learned, and and being able to generalize rather than computing all these trajectories and possibilities like that. It may be that in some cases they're equivalent because your heuristics are sufficiently good. Ideally that's what you would want to happen.
You are kind of organized time-wise, right? It's not going to take more less than if you're not interrupted. It's going to take no more than 20 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll try.
You'll try.
I'll
I'll get
have a
7.
chance to. You get to be first, so you have enough time. But I do try to say something else afterwards.
I timed myself. And I'm somewhere in between 8 and 10 minutes, but there's also like a short video demonstration. I don't know how long. So like this.
It's very easy to see how long this video demonstration is.
So the length of the video is easy.
Right.
Yeah. But the question is because that part is going to be sort of interactive for people.
Okay.
We'll see. It should be.
Within 20 minutes.
I'm on 7, so 10 plus 7.
Okay. So let's start.
And then I'll swap with it.
Hopefully my computer won't die in the middle. Carmel not here. Oh man.
Okay, are we optimal Bayesian inferences?
Okay.
And end of the day was what?
Okay, so this paper is entitled Pure Reasoning in 12-Month-Old Infants as Probabilistic Inference. It's by Teglath et al. In Science. I'm sure many of you recognize the infant in the figure. So in order to introduce the idea of this paper to you, I want to play a game. Hopefully these videos will work. Well, actually, before we begin, so what you're going to see here, you're going to see a circle with a bunch of objects moving around. After a few seconds, there will be an occlusion. There will be a blue screen that comes up and covers the circle. And after about 2 seconds, one of the objects is going to come out. Okay, so the rules of the game is that when the blue screen comes up and covers the circle, you're supposed to shout out what color object you think will come out. Okay, you got it?
What color object you think will come out?
Correct. So there will be a blue screen covering, you won't see anything. You won't see anything, and then you have to guess based on what you saw, what color object you think will come out. There are two of them, so if you mess up the first one, you can do the second one.
Blue, yellow.
Okay, people who said blue, why did you say blue? Yeah, so why?
Why? Because there was only one blue and two yellow, and also it was close to what I decided is the the closest.
But because there was one blue, you thought it would come
I
out.
have my reasons.
Okay, and now we're going to display the second video. Same idea.
Yellow.
Okay, why did people say yellow?
Because the blue one was
Okay.
I think the yellow is too big to come out, I think.
Okay, so you got the idea. One second here. Okay, so where is my okay. Anyway, so what we saw here is that you're using different kinds of information to make a prediction about the future when the future is uncertain. And so as you correctly said, so there are two kinds of information that you sort of use. You use proximity information, which object was closest to the exit, and you also use numerosity information about which object was more numerous. So we know that we can make these kinds of predictions, but there are some specific questions that we can ask. So one of the questions that we can ask is this ability innate or learned? And this is something we talked a lot about last semester in Cognitive Processes A. And sort of a way of getting at this question of innate versus learned is we ask the question, how early do infants exhibit this behavior? And if really young infants exhibit this behavior, that indicates possibly that this is innate to some degree. And another question that we can ask is there maybe a specific model, specific algorithmic or computational model that we can use to describe how we predict and what exactly it is that we're predicting? So what I want to do now is just show you some experimental data. This is experimental data from 12-month-old infants. And what we have here are three different experimental conditions. The experimental conditions have different occlusion lengths. So the blue screen was covering the circle for different lengths in the different experimental conditions. And the idea behind this is that if you have a very short occlusion, so the information that should be most relevant is the position, the state of the object in the circle immediately before the occlusion. Because the occlusion is very short, so whatever is closest to the exit should leave immediately. However, if the occlusion is longer, so what should happen is that the objects will move around more, and what should end up dominating your prediction is just the number of objects in the scene. And in fact, that's what we see here in the infant looking time. So this is the case of a short occlusion. And so in the case of a short occlusion, what we can see is that the near objects, when the near objects came out, that was less surprising. When the far objects came out, that was more surprising. We also see this when there was an intermediate occlusion of just 1 second. Again, the near objects were less surprising, far objects were more surprising. But within each category, the blue object, which in this case is more numerous, so the blue object was more expected. And the red object was more surprising, presumably because of the numerosity. And then here, when the occlusion is longer, so the object bumps around a lot, and the proximity matters less. So what ends up dominating is the more numerous objects, and the less numerous objects, regardless of where they were initially. So that information is less important, and so when you see one of those objects, it's more surprising. You understand?
So the 10 seconds, at least 10 seconds would be time without
Correct.
And then they look for 10 seconds. The
Yeah.
movie still remembers what happened 10 seconds ago.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, I agree. But that's the data that they got. And so now the question is, can we come up with a model that models this data relatively well? And so the model that they use is, they call it an ideal Bayesian observer model, but it's actually just a Monte Carlo approach. And I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the Monte Carlo approach, but the idea is that that you start with an initial state, and then you simulate the experiment, let's say thousands of times, and you look at the probability of each result. So essentially what you're doing is you start with the configuration of the objects in the circle immediately before the occlusion, and then you simulate this thing, and it has some randomness in it. And you do that a bunch of times, and you see what kind of outcomes you get. And just to show you what this model predicts, I just want to look at this figure for now. So this is the conditional probability given that the object leaves at a particular time. So what's the likelihood that it will either be the red object, which is less numerous, or the blue object, which is more numerous? And here we have these two different initial configurations, one where the red object is closer to the exit, and one where the red object is further away. So what we can see is that in this case, where the red object is closer to the exit initially, so at first, if the object leaves very close to the beginning of the simulation, so probably that object will be the red object. However, as the simulation continues, and objects still haven't come out yet, and the objects have more time to mix around, so eventually the blue object, which is more numerous, begins to dominate until you reach a steady state, which is around 75% to 25%, which is what you would expect just based on the numerosity. And you see the same kind of idea here when you start with this configuration. So initially, when the blue objects are close to the exit, so you expect the blue objects to come out if the occlusion is very short, and as time goes on, again, you reach the 75-25 steady state. And this is what the model predicts for each of these situations that we saw before experimentally. Without getting too much into the details, the experimental data from the infants fit the model relatively well, and we can see the fit here. And what they claim in the paper is that this model accounted for around 88% of the variance in the experimental data. So it seems that infants are able, to some degree, to predict in a way that an ideal Bayesian observer or a Monte Carlo model would simulate. However, there are some qualifications to this, which Alon is going to present some further experimental data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How model compute looking time?
So the model doesn't compute looking time. What it predicts is the level of surprise. So, and level of surprise is 1 minus the probability. And basically what you do is you scale that so that it matches looking time.
What was the scale? No?
So I'm not exactly sure the mathematics about how they did this, but assume that you have some quantification of surprise at a number between 0 and 1.
Right.
And you use some sort of constant to scale that to the looking time. So use, let's say, the baseline of 10 seconds or whatever. And
it could be very artificial according to the scale.
But it's not scale.
Yeah, but if you have many data points, then
Then
there's a limit to your interpretive. I mean, if you have just 2, you're right, but you have...
Yeah, but how do you get the range of number between 10 and 16?
No, this is the experimental data. Why is the experimental data an X prediction? Not scale, it's just, those are just points.
The X is the model and the
yeah,
the
X
Y
is the model, Y is.
And it's not like, those are different numbers, and it's okay.
Okay.
But I mean, the fact that this line has the numbers on the axis are what they are is because of some kind of scaling. But the idea is that the line matches.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to present you a paper that follows the last one, also by Teglas in a different group of people. And so just before we talk about it, of course, it's also in science. So just before we talk about it, let's talk a little bit about the ability of inference to use probability, or just our ability to use probability. So intuitive use of probability requires at least two different abilities. One ability is the ability to reason about physical aspects of the scene of what we're trying to judge, because this affects the probabilities of what would happen. Let's say if there's a wall in the board that was shown before, so it changes the probability. And also an ability to internally represent quantities and ratios, which is important because what we're interested in, if we have a ball and we need to pull one ball outside in different color, we're actually asking about the ratio of the blues compared to the reds, or the stars compared to the cubes. So this ability to internally represent quantities and ratios can probably be done by many systems. I'll try to put name to them, and this is what they do in the article, so don't blame me if I'm not that successful in that. So two general systems. One of them is a large system that does approximations to large numbers, and it does so in a relatively inaccurate way, approximations. And some other systems or systems that do subitizing or object tracking, which is a fast, accurate, parallel and limited capacity system. So above 4 objects that we need to keep track about their quantity, and it has difficulties. And what they ask is, so they ask this question. They ask whether this probability inference is relying on the ability to do subitizing, to compute several, to keep track of several items at once. And what they did, they actually they kept the ratio of the items the same, but they just multiplied it. So in the first it's 1 to 3, and now it's 4 to 12. It's the same ratio of objects, but in this condition, if we're using if inference use subitizing, so it's beyond the capacity of the system, and they will have difficulties. And in this situation, it's within the capacity of the system, and they're supposed to have less difficulties. So they did not exactly, similar experiment from what you've seen, only this time the occlusion time was constant, it was 2 seconds for all the different conditions. And the different conditions were that in one time, in the first experiment, there were 1 to 3, and the second experiment was 4 to 12. Sorry, thanks. So this is what they got as a result. In the first experiment, they've got the same result from before, from the first paper, and this difference is significant. This was less expected if the one of the object from the one category came out, it was less expected than the three category. But when they increased the amount, the numerosity of the object, they didn't find any effect. They got the H0 hypothesis. So they used this statistical tool to analyze this result, and and they claim that only the inference in the experiment 1 were sensitive to the difference in probability of a single outcome. So the ability to do inference is based on perhaps the subitizing system, because once we increase the number of objects, they can't do it. So another possible explanation is that perhaps they were overwhelmed by the numerosity of the objects, and they couldn't keep track of all the information, and they just saw black, okay, or something like that. They didn't solve that. To overcome this claim, they did another experiment, and in this experiment, they've decided to change a different parameter that does not rely that does not depend on the quantity of the object, physical trait. And this trait was size, because if they increase the size, so you can see that it's more dense. It takes more area in the board, and because they're randomly bumping into each other, so it makes harder for objects to move around in the board during the occlusion and before. Another thing they have changed is just before the occlusion there was a change of phases and differentiation. So one group was above and one group was below near the exit. So I want to ask you, which one is more likely that the blues would come from A or from B? From B, obviously. They're also closer, but in this condition, not only they are far, but they need to travel through all those cubes, and it's really difficult because they're big and physical. So this is more probable, and they've checked that with inference. The same thing they've done before, just changes the size, and now they've got this effect, and they've checked the interaction between the close or distant or which group the item came from, and they found the interaction was significant, and that's how they say, okay, there is still they do have some sort of inference, probabilistic inference, but it does not depend on it needs not to depend on specific objects and their trajectories, and to keep in mind their mathematical quantities. So they conclude that the inference can process and form expectation about complex dynamic scenes with multiple objects, and where they are not required to present individual quantities. So this is it. Let's say, talk about the summary. So inference can act as ideal Bayesian observers when presented with small number of objects, but with a larger number of objects, they do not exhibit predictive behavior. On contrary, if the objects are sufficiently large, inference do exhibit predictive behavior, even if there are many objects. So those are the results, and this is the claim. And if you have any questions for me or for Tobias, no, it's it.
I have a question. It's not the beginning, the one that Tobias. If you can go to the one with the first one with the data, way in the beginning, next. Did they refer to the fact that in the short exposure, the blue is more surprising than the red?
Yeah, so that's difficult. Let's see, this is not a result that you would expect, and in fact, it is a result it was not predicted by the model. So here in the model, what you see is that it's always the case that if an object is far away, if the occlusion is very short, of course the object isn't going to come up because it would have to go way too fast, and it doesn't work. So in the model, the surprise is 1 there. So I personally don't know how to account for it, and that is a problem in terms of the data, but the rest of the data does seem to line up with the hypothesis. So
perhaps I can.
Yeah.
I think those experiments are extremely slow on the amount of inference that's participated in, and the amount that were actually got into the analysis in the end. It's not that big. I mean, it could be just a noise. In my part, on the second page, they had to exclude from analysis approximately half of the inference they worked with because they were fussy or their mother.
It always happens with inference.
Yeah, so I don't know. Perhaps it's just variation because of the.
Because some, like most of their predictions, the model could predict, like more than like 5 or something like that. And doesn't it affect your predictions, like the course of the experiment itself? Like when you see a lot of surprising results, it may change your statistics. Like
Yeah, so that's true. And so here actually you have a number of different experimental conditions. So you have these different initial configurations, and usually what you do is you do a Latin square design. So some of the infants see one configuration first, and other infants see a different configuration, and then you average across all of them, even though they're in a different order. And in theory that will give you data which is less biased. Anything else?
Thank you very much.
So the last thing I wanted to in a minute. No, no. בסדר?
כן, that's the HDMI, you can say HDMI.
By the way, I think I have a solution for this. But wait a minute. But this is just to ask you to either several solutions came up in the break, either just to have you write down the things that you have seen, which means that you will have seen some, assuming that you will have seen some, or just to name them as they go, even though you name slower, so we will miss part, but it means, if it works, that you can identify at least part very, very quickly, which was the age that I wanted to show you. But I don't want to get into it, it's just, okay. The paper I want to discuss is, in a way, related to the same conceptualization. So babies perhaps are based in inferences, and this is somewhat of a related question, even though it's not about intuitive physics. One could address this as kind of intuitive physics, and to what extent it reflects Bayesian inference. It's about reasoning, cognitive reasoning, and the cognitive reasoning is the kind that you were asked to perform. So did all of you answer questions that you were asked? Suppose you meet a person who's 27. What is your best account for this person's life expectancy? Right. So, and the question is, and we looked. I will show you in 5 minutes. We looked at the data that we collected in a very, very small experiment, and we asked every person just about one data point, so as not to have these effects of being previously asked. So we have kind of sparse data, but actually, I think for almost all the dots, we kind of replicated the original experiment data. But this is the question. So the question is, how do we do that? Okay, and you were asked about three different questions. One was about life expectancy. The second was about cooking time of cakes. I don't know why it keeps going out. And the third was gross. This is kind of, we asked these questions. I think the third one is kind of more American oriented, but we wanted to replicate. I think Americans are more interested in right? I don't know. But I think this is the one this is the one. This is the only one we got deviations from the original publication. So what is it? You know how much a movie has made so far. Given that you know how much a movie made so far, given that you know the current situation, what will be your best prediction, your best inference for the total, the gross total that this movie is going to make? Or given that you know that the cake has been baking or has been in the oven for so and so time, what is your best estimate for how long it should take altogether, and etc. for the life expectancy? And the original paper that we took from Psych Science by Griffith and Tenenbaum from 2006 had more questions, but the reason we sampled these questions, and the main claim is that people have wonderful predictions, okay? So what does it mean? And the reason, and the question is what does it mean, okay? And the reason we sampled from these three questions is because the total, okay, the distribution of the total in the general world differs to these three questions. They had more questions, they had, let's see, they had more questions, these are kind of the total questions that they asked each participant, so each participant was given just one number, but was asked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I don't know, 8 questions, okay? And what characterizes these questions is that the distribution of the total in the world, so they took you from some source of information, from the internet, for some kind of data structure, is that the distribution of the total in the world differs in its nature for these different questions. So if you look at the distribution of lifespan, it's kind of a Gaussian distribution, okay? Worldwide, I don't know, I mean it differs, and of course some people tended to be more picky about it because it's different for men and for women, it's different across lots of stuff, and basically the average is around 75, with some deviation of something like 16. There's like movie runtime is also roughly Gaussian distributed, but there's also other questions which are other distributions which are distributed in this is kind of power law, which means that, for instance, movie grosses, most movies do not make money, but very, very few make a lot of money, right? So you have this kind of distribution. Poems, I had no idea. I guess most poems are pretty short, but some kind of annoyingly long, I don't know, or pleasurably long, whatever, but this is kind of the distribution. And there's a third distribution that they looked at, and it's called Erlang distribution, which means that it goes up and down, and Keck is kind of a complex distribution because, well, most Keck is a kind of a mode at 60 minutes, and I don't know, maybe, I mean, we need to ask gender distribution or experience distribution or whatever, and they are related, but the idea is that you use different distributions of the total. And the different distributions of the total are important because given the distribution of the total, the expected graph of your estimation, the expected nature of the graph of your estimation, of your best estimation of the posterior changes, okay? So the question so the critical question is whether, given different distribution of the total, people indeed produce different graphs for their best estimation of the conditional probability, okay? I mean, it's not just one case, it's not surprising. Suppose people always kind of implicitly assume a Gaussian distribution, and then you will expect that this will look nice, this will look nice. The question is whether they kind of update, okay, implicitly, because the question is, I hope I have some 2 or 3 minutes to ask you for your introspection, but basically, the question is whether people can adapt to the different total distributions and produce different graphs, okay? So what would be different graphs, different dependencies of the total estimating based on the current size, okay? And here is what they got. Here is what they got. And no, sorry. I don't know. Okay. And here is what they got for all these cases. This is kind of the optimal. This one, okay, is the optimal inference, okay? Assuming that you know the distribution and you know the likelihood and you multiply it and you optimize your inference, this is the expected graph. And these are the data points, okay? Every data point is an average of quite many participants. This will be an issue, but this is the average. And this kind of 68, I don't know why they did 68, 2/3 confidence interval, right. This is the 68% confidence interval, okay? So basically,
You can still see.
okay, you can still see, basically,
what we see is that, okay, so the shape of the graph depends on the distribution of the total, okay? And we won't get into the calculation. Basically, we see that this is really optimal for the Gauss distribution, and for these power law distribution, we expect a different curve, and still people match in their best prediction this Gaussian curve, and predict what's called Erlang distribution. There's somewhat of a different slope. It's kind of linear, somewhat of a different slope than is expected, and still participants do almost perfectly, except for this will be an issue, and this is kind of, you know that they're given furrow, has ruled, has reigned for so and so years. How long do you expect them to rule in total? This is the only case, perhaps it's not surprising because people know very little about the duration of the ruling of pharaohs, that this deviated from purpose. And with cakes it's a bit more complicated because you have this more than 60 minutes and still people do extremely well. So the claim is that people kind of do optimal Bayesian inferences, because regardless of what the distribution of the total is across different distributions, which predict different predictions of the curves between the conditional probability, people do roughly perfectly across all these conditions. Okay? This is a very, very strong claim. This was the main claim of their paper.
But do you accept the first one? Or
This one?
what is perfect? Perfect means on the diagonal? And so what is it?
Perfect means that they are not this curve. Why did they have the diagonal? Diagonal is one of them. Like, suppose they had, I think the diagonal is for the Erlang. No, it's not for it. I don't know. I don't remember what this one is. But basically, the idea is that the simple are simple responses, and this one is the optimal responses. Okay. So the way they form this dot is like it's like we asked. Okay. Each person was asked only about one condition, so that they will not have an effect of previous question. But overall, they have something like in the range of 200 people that participated. So let's say they would have 30 to 40 participants for each data point, and across the board, they produced the average responses. Okay? And if you think about, is it reproducible, and what we have, this is something we've looked at when we looked at your results for 3 of the questions, and the questions we chose, we didn't have enough, we just chose, we spread the questions for 3 different distributions, right? So we had one question for the Gaussian distribution, which is the life expectancy, one question for the movies, and one question for the cakes, right? I think you did well with the cakes.